Hello, everyone. I'm Suzanne Basala, President and CEO of the U.S. Japan Council. Welcome to our Bilateral Boardroom, Purpose-Driven Leadership in U.S. Japan Relations. Our Bilateral Boardroom is the centerpiece of USJC's signature series that we designed last year in lieu of our in-person annual conference. We first offered this event a year ago, at the height of the pandemic, bringing leaders together in a virtual boardroom to discuss pressing issues across business, government, and civil sector in the U.S. and Japan. Last fall's Bilateral Boardroom focused on lessons learned from crisis leadership, featuring diverse executive decision makers who shared their insights and perspectives from Tokyo, Wall Street, and Washington, D.C. Our dialogues, as well as the continued unfolding of the pandemic, climate crisis, and social injustices, have reminded us that there is no other option than for U.S. and Japanese leaders to address these significant challenges together. In this summer's edition of the Bilateral Boardroom, we honed in on one of the pivotal issues of our times, the climate crisis. Our distinguished guest speakers, U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate John Kerry, and then Minister for Environment Koizumi Shinjiro of Japan, explained their nation's respective priorities, but tempered their outlook for meaningful progress with a clear call to action for leadership at all levels. Without that, as Secretary Kerry noted, we face an existential threat. So today, in our second Bilateral Boardroom event of the year, we explore what is needed to tackle climate and other global crises, purpose-driven leadership. We're thrilled to bring together the most respected and groundbreaking leaders active in the ESG and climate arenas, as well as to introduce some fresh voices. Our program starts with a reminder of our own founding leaders' purpose, features an update on global climate efforts, and then invites deeper business insights from two top corporate leaders, BlackRock's Larry Fink and Hitachi's Toshiaki Higashihara. We'll close with a discussion among USJC leaders whose work focuses on these issues. None of this would be possible without the tremendous support of the Council's many sponsors, whose names were shown earlier. A full list can be seen on our website. In particular, I would like to recognize USJC's platinum sponsors, Deloitte and Fabit. Thank you also to our title sponsors, representing the diversity of stakeholders deeply committed to USJC's mission of strengthening U.S.-Japan relations through people-to-people ties. Amazon, the Aratani Foundation, Central Pacific Bank, Google, Hitachi, Ito-En, Mitsui & Company, MUFG, NEC, Oryx, Terasaki Nibei Foundation, the Toshizo Watanabe Foundation, and the Toyota Research Institute. On behalf of the USJC Board of Directors, thank you to all our supporters. As we consider purpose-driven leaders, we honor our founders, especially our founding president, the late Irene Hirano Inoue, and her husband, U.S. Senator Daniel K. Inoue. Their vision and their contributions to the U.S.-Japan relationship received special recognition earlier this year. Please take a look.
On July 24th, the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo hosted a ceremony to dedicate a room at the Chief of Mission Residence to USJC founders, the late U.S. Senator Daniel K. Inoue and Irene Hirano Inoue. Representatives from both families, USJC, and the U.S. government were in attendance. Dr. Jill Biden dedicated the Irene Hirano Inoue and Daniel K. Inoue Room and offered remarks on behalf of President Joe Biden about Irene's legacy.
Irene dedicated her life lifting up women, especially those of Japanese descent, and not simply through words, but through action.
And she recalled the deep friendship between the president and Senator Inoue.
He was a mentor to my husband Joe, but more importantly, he was a true friend whose kindness really knew no bounds. And I think that Joe, if he were to count his 5 friends that he's had that meant the most to him in life, I know that Danny Inoue would be one of them. So on behalf of the President, it is my great honor to dedicate this room in the name of Irene Hirano Inoue and Senator Daniel K. Inoue.
On October 7th, Los Angeles Consul General Muto Akira hosted a conferment ceremony to honor Irene with the Order of the Rising Sun, gold raised with neck ribbon, highlighting her role in promoting and advancing the relationship between the United States and Japan, and in the founding and development of USJC. Jennifer Hirano accepted the decoration on behalf of her mother. These two honors now stand as official tributes to two of USJC's founders and recognition of their unparalleled dedication, drive, and leadership in strengthening the U.S.-Japan relationship.
We are grateful to all those who made these honors possible. Now, I welcome Melanie Nakagawa, President Biden's Special Assistant and the Senior Director for Climate and Energy on the National Security Council. A member of the U.S. leadership team at the COP26 Climate Conference in Glasgow, Melanie will provide her take on the conference. Melanie, thank you for joining. Could you please share with us some of the key takeaways from the meetings in Glasgow and also what's next?
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I'm very glad to have this opportunity to share some of my experiences in Glasgow at COP26 with all of you and to highlight the progress we've made. Given that your agenda today includes a focus on purpose-driven leadership, I'm particularly pleased to discuss how COP26 was a showcase of President Biden's whole-of-government purpose-driven leadership around climate, featuring about a dozen cabinet-level officials on the ground at the conference during the 2 weeks of COP26. This included Secretary of Energy, the Environmental Protection Agency, to the Department of Interior and Treasury and Transportation. And we were thrilled to demonstrate that the U.S. is back at the table and actively taking part in climate action. President Biden launched announcements across the government, everything from the first plan to conserve global forests to the Agricultural Innovation Mission for Climate, featuring both public and private sector commitments engaged on mobilization of dollars, action, and concrete targets for many of these key sectors. The president also recognized the importance of adaptation and resilience, especially for the most vulnerable countries that are out there. So we launched something called the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience. The shorthand was PREPARE. And it's another first-of-its-kind plan that supports adaptation efforts for more than 500 million people worldwide. Together with the European Union, we're really excited to launch the Global Methane Pledge. The president, back in September, soft launched this with his European partners with about 9 countries. And in a very short period of time, we left Glasgow with over 105 nations, representing 70% of the global economy, committed to significantly reduce emissions of methane by 2030. What's important to note here is that methane is a potent greenhouse gas, about 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide. And so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, a key scientific body, they've also assessed that this is basically one of the single fastest options we have to slow climate change and global warming in the near term. So this global commitment involving all these countries was a key indicator of the global momentum we're seeing around the world for climate action. And when it comes to initiatives of the private sector, which all of you know well, it has a critical and important role to play, we've seen perhaps some of the biggest launches ever in terms of public-private partnerships and the critical role these relationships play between countries in implementing these new initiatives. 2 examples to flag are, one is called the First Movers Coalition. This is an effort to rally private sector partners to send a clear demand signal for technologies in the hard-to-abate industrial and transportation sectors. This is helping to create the market and spur further innovation in technologies like clean hydrogen, green steel, sustainable aviation fuels. We also launched the Clean Energy Demand Initiative. This is driving renewable energy deployment by working with large multinational companies to send a demand signal and to incentivize countries to move forward with policies that support renewable energy development. So again, I was really glad to be a part of President Biden's work to return the United States to the global stage on climate, and in particular at COP26. My first COP was back in 2006, that's COP12, and over the last several years and decades even, what really struck me about this COP in particular was the energy both within the main hall at the conference center itself where the negotiators were, but also all the action that was happening outside of COP26. It was basically a conference within a conference that was happening. The energy and the momentum from stakeholders all around various sectors aligning both not only the governments but also non-governmental actors was so critical and so important, and quite a departure from previous COPs that I've attended. We really welcomed back leaders on the leader stage, but not just government leaders, but private sector leaders, nonprofit organizations, indigenous peoples and tribes, and the youth, frankly, were all active in and around the Glasgow Conference Center, all the way stemming down to Edinburgh for some of these events as well. But even more so in concert with the announcement from governments, I also saw several different discussions around what the private sector can do to step up to the plate. But it wasn't just pledges or things that they were going to do in the future. Frankly, it was a stock take of many of the things they've already started to do and things that they were planning to do in the near term. And we all know that we can't meet our goals without working together with the private sector. No matter how many billions of dollars we raise towards the $100 billion climate finance goal that was set back in 2009, we know we need trillions more from the private sector to truly turn the corner on climate action. And so while we're incredibly proud that the progress we've made from the U.S.'s commitment to quadruple our investment in climate finance that the president made in September, we also know that we need to work in partnership with other countries and other governments and the private sector to actually turn that billions into trillions. I was proud to be there when Japan's Prime Minister Kishida announced an additional pledge over the next 5 years, where we expect the private sector to play a key role in that as well. This is just one example of a key accomplishment where we helped ensure developed countries can meet their commitment, but also bring businesses into this challenge and into this fight so that the private sector can bring the innovation and technology needed. This is also a great example of where I see an opportunity for U.S. and Japanese businesses to collaborate. It's been a real pleasure to be here in Washington and learning more about the role that Japanese technology businesses and companies in supply chain and elsewhere have contributed to actual net zero alignment or climate alignment as we go forward. This also includes the GPIF and Japanese Pension Fund and their alignment with important key climate goals out there in the sector. But everything from finance to technology to innovation, these are all really unique opportunities as we move into what we are seeing as the implementation year, this road from Glasgow, where we're implementing our targets and our actions. As we move into this road from Glasgow, I really look forward to learning more where you all can play a role and join us as we look to establish more concrete actions. And of course, I'd be remiss if I did not highlight an important milestone at home, the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure deal, which the president just signed into law yesterday here in Washington. This is a fulfillment of President Biden's promise to work across the aisle and forge consensus to deliver results. A bipartisan infrastructure deal that will deliver for the American people. This deal creates good-paying union jobs across the United States. And from a climate perspective, what makes it so exciting is that it helps transform rail, roads, bridges, public transit. It modernizes our ports and airports, our freight infrastructure, and it helps also deal with manufacturing of solar panels, wind farms, batteries, electric vehicles. It's going to build out the first ever national network of charging stations so that we can travel from coast to coast in electric vehicles. And importantly, and what resonates probably with many of you, and particularly with Japan, it also will help build up our resilience to superstorms, to droughts, wildfires, hurricanes that cost us billions of dollars in damage. So at the same time, the House is going to continue to advance the president's Build Back Better framework this week. It's going to look to create jobs and cut taxes at home while tackling the climate crisis. And we're really excited about our momentum at home that mirrors the Glasgow outcomes. We left with greater momentum than ever before to achieve our climate goals during what we're calling this decisive decade, the 2020s. And again, this is both through countries agreeing on steps to continuing strengthening our ambition and through the private sector's commitment to work to avoid the worst of the climate impacts and provide a more secure and healthier and prosperous planet. Thanks to our work in Glasgow, we now have a clear path towards achieving our 2030 goals and a net zero, carbon neutral, and pollution neutral free by 2050. We have also secured commitments, funding, ambition that we need to get us there. But of course, we know there's much more work to be done. We know we left Glasgow with a gap. We know that we need to close that gap in ambition as quickly as possible, and it's require these kind of partnerships to not only be forged, but accelerated in the near term. In this administration in particular, we're committed to implementing these new partnerships, to implementing the aggressive and ambitious agenda we've laid out already in this first year. And I'm incredibly proud to reflect on the fact that, having joined this administration earlier this year, having served in the Obama administration, it's really clear that we have sort of jumpstart this year with a real path, a real purpose-driven path in terms of addressing climate action in this administration. both to tackle the crisis at home, but also abroad. And so Glasgow to me was a real great moment and a milestone in demonstrating, as we look ahead, what more work needs to be done, but how we continue to ratchet up ambition over the years ahead to make that happen. So thank you for having me here today, and I look forward to working with all of you as we continue to advance our climate ambition and achieve our goals together.
Thank you, Melanie, for your dedication and service. COP26 is history in the making, and we are appreciative of your insider's perspective. The U.S. Japan Council is committed to using our network and convening power to address the climate crisis. To this end, we're launching a 2-year USJC Climate and Sustainability Initiative, and we are incredibly grateful to Amazon for their generous anchor gift to make this possible. We'll be sharing more about this initiative in the near future. Now we turn to our first featured dialogue with BlackRock's Chairman and CEO, Larry Fink. Few other business leaders have done more to set the agenda on tackling the climate crisis and making progress on ESGs. And we are truly privileged to host Larry and BlackRock co-founder Sue Wagner. Here to welcome them to our bilateral boardroom is USJC's previous board chair, Phyllis Campbell.
Well, it's my honor to introduce someone who literally needs no introduction, Larry Fink. For those of you that don't know him, he is the founder, the chairman and CEO of BlackRock, which is the world's largest asset manager and literally holds shares in almost every company around the world that is publicly traded. So we're very honored to have Larry, because when Larry speaks, we certainly all listen. And the person that is going to interview him today is also an absolute powerhouse in her own right, someone who I know well as a colleague and a friend, and that's Sue Wagner. And Sue is somebody that also is sought after by many, many companies. She is a former vice chairman of BlackRock. She also sits on many prestigious corporate boards, and her advice is sought out because of her stature. So this dialogue is important. And on behalf of the U.S. Japan Council's Bilateral Boardroom, we appreciate you all joining to listen, because the timing is such that we can't pick up one newspaper, one social media post, and not hear about climate change, sustainability, the goals that the world's setting for the next decade. So this conversation is extremely timely. And I can assure you that having Larry today speak on this is probably one of the most important, significant things that we could bring to you. He shapes the conversation and has for years on ESG, on leading with purpose as companies, and certainly on all subjects of governance and good governance. So this is exciting for us to bring this to you. Larry is certainly somebody that influences decisions, moves markets, moves companies. And this conversation about opportunities between US and Japanese companies, which I hope we'll touch on today, should be of interest to all of us. So with that, Sue, as a former vice chairman of BlackRock, has spent time in Japan. She knows Japan well. During her tenure at BlackRock, she helped BlackRock expand in Japan. So there couldn't be somebody better to moderate this conversation today. So I'm very pleased to turn it over to you, Sue. Welcome.
Thank you, Phyllis, and thank you for that very kind introduction. Larry and I actually traveled to Japan together countless times when we were starting BlackRock, and so it's a place we both love and care about a lot. So Larry, let's start with some context. You've been at this for a long time, and you've seen massive shifts in the investing landscape over that time. What are some of the biggest shifts you've seen in market activity, in business strategy, and in investment priorities?
Well, thank you, Sue. And let me just tell the audience that Sue was a co-founder alongside with me. I now report to her as she is a board member of BlackRock and a board member of Apple. But importantly, we have been friends, and we remain to be friends. And it's a very big honor for me to be interviewed by a board member. So thank you, Sue. We've had an existential crisis in COVID. It's changing how we, humanity, are living, how we think. It's changing behaviors. It's changing how we consume. It's changing how we live, what we consume, how we consume information and media. And to me, this is a huge macro trend change. And even today, having a conference like this via video would have been unheard of 2 years ago. And yet we find this acceptable, maybe not perfect. Obviously, I do believe being together in a room connecting in a more humanistic way is always a better outcome. But we've been able to adapt and we've been able to live and accept this way of living by communicating via video. So the marketplace is adjusting to these very large macro trends. At the same time, we have, because of the severity of the crisis, we have been living with a tremendous amount of fiscal stimulus by various governments around the world to stabilize their economies, and historic large monetary policy support. And the combination of both monetary and fiscal support have led to a dramatic rebound from the depths of the markets of March 2020. At the same time, probably beginning in early 2019, there has been a greater recognition in the financial markets that climate risk is investment risk. And so we are seeing all these big macro trends hitting us at the same time. Now, going forward, because of the success of monetary and fiscal stimulus, and then importantly, the success of a vaccination, and transforming this deadly disease maybe into a modest disease for those who are vaccinated, avoidance of hospitalization. We as humanity will be able to live with this like we live with the seasonal flu. The big problem is, and I would say one of the black eyes to countries worldwide, and I think the history books are going to say some very negative things about it, the developed economies could not come together and support the developing economies to build rapid manufacturing of the vaccination. So by the end of 2021, we could be saying we conquered COVID. And at this moment, we're saying we may have conquered COVID in most of the developed world, but we have not done that in the developing world. So all of this is leading to probably bigger changes going forward, big macro changes going forward. We have greater inequality in the world than ever before. We have an emerging world that is going to struggle for years until they are fully vaccinated. And indeed, we even have a China that is, despite its success, it's still it's very closed. And that leads to other outcomes right now. So I expect we're going to see a reduction in monetary policy. We're going to have to see how markets adapt through that. We are going to see in most countries a cessation of fiscal stimulus. Maybe in the United States, we'll finally have an infrastructure bill. We may have some form of social programs to try to balance the inequalities in the United States. But I would say for Japan, for the United States, the reliance on deficit financing is going to become harder. It's going to become harder because with all the success, I see higher inflation rates. It's the cost of financing these deficits are going to go higher. And through all these issues, I think the marketplace is going to have to digest all of this. The one thing I can say overall, and I'll allow another question from Sue, the wall of money, we estimate is about $17 trillion of money that is looking to be put to work. And so despite all of these big macro issues that may or may not disrupt markets for a period of time, the amount of money that needs to be invested is so large, this will overcome some of the imbalances, maybe even higher inflation. But I do believe our central banks of the world are studying this, they're focusing on this, and I don't think they're going to be too far behind. And yet, I do believe inflation at this time is higher than they are admitting. And so with all that, Sue, I think, markets are business as usual, a lot of stresses, a lot of new inputs. But I do believe the reality is you need to be an optimist. You need to believe that we can fix things. I think the success of capitalism, of finding a vaccination in very short order, is a great example of how we overcome adversity as a world, as humanity. I do believe, as a segue into climate and climate risk, I do believe we are going to have over the next 5-10 years some breakthrough technologies that will rapidly help us and assist us to a more decarbonized world. If we cannot find those breakthrough technologies, though, we are not going to get to a net zero world. And so the key is going to be more success like we saw with the COVID vaccination, a public-private enterprise of trying to find solutions together to decarbonize coal and cement and agriculture, to decarbonize other components of the world, to create a better power grid that is powered by renewables and other forms of energy. This is our destiny, and if we don't achieve this destiny as humanity, we are going to have a more a world that is going to be full of much greater inequalities, as some parts of the world are going to have bigger issues related to coping with climate and the related consequences of climate.
Thanks, Larry. Let me actually use that as a jumping off point to the next topic, which is actually that we all have a role to play. And you've said that all companies must have a purpose. What is BlackRock's purpose, and how does that impact the way you lead the company?
Well, I think fortunately, with you and other founding partners, we actually thought about what our purpose was at the very beginning, and we have not changed our belief in what we were doing. We always believed that the client came first. We always believed that as an investment advisor, our job is to inform the owners of capital. And our job is to make more people feel more comfortable, more confident in their future. We focus on the long term. Never have we ever focused on things about the ins and outs of financial markets. We don't care about the velocity of money. It is about driving long-term investing for the betterment of more portions of savers in the world to enjoy retirement and dignity, to enjoy their family with joy. And so we have always been living our organization with purpose. And I think this is one of the fundamental reasons why, as a firm, when we started the firm with 8 people in an office with not a client 33 years ago, and today we are managing more money for asset owners than any firm in the world. And I believe it is because of our voice of long-termism, our voice of trying to help our asset owners understand where we believe the world is taking us and how can they best perform their needs in this dynamic world today. And I believe our voice is probably more relevant to our asset owners than any time in our history because of this 33-year consistency in our purpose. And this is one of the things when I write my CEO letters, I reflect on. And I do believe more than ever before, Sue, that companies have to be living their purpose more than ever before. They have to be more than ever before focusing on their clients. In this COVID-related world and bringing people back to office, it is about how do we connect with our employees? How do we build better client and employee connectivity? And through all of that, in this world today that is becoming less global but more decentralized, deglobalized, which has very bad intended consequences, we as a global company have to show our purpose. In Japan, we must be Japanese. In the United States, we must be American. And that's what I'm trying to ask all companies to do. And I think we as a company for 33 years have lived that purpose.
So we talked a minute ago about clients. The other thing from the very beginning of the firm was our focus on risk as an integral component of how we think about achieving that purpose. And so I want to turn back to that for a second. You've touched on it already, but when we dig into ESG and we start with E, right, climate and sustainability is a particular area of focus for BlackRock. Can you explain why you've said climate risk is investment risk and share how you think the climate transition presents a historic investment opportunity?
Well, one of the foundational components of who BlackRock was understanding risks. Uh, as you know, we started the organization with a heavy emphasis of risk, and we built our own proprietary risk tools to help us navigate as a young firm, and that ultimately differentiated us today, where we have one of the largest risk management platforms in the world to help our asset owners understand their risk, understand their risk, and with so many different lenses on. As I said in my 2020 letter, that climate risk is investment risk. We need to quantify that. We need to show what we mean by that, and we believe it's beyond. It has to be beyond just our, let's say, our social views on and our environmental views on climate. We need to quantify where we see climate risk and how it impacts a portfolio. I said in that letter also there's going to be a tectonic shift in money moving out of traditional indexes into new, more environmental indexes. We have now been awarded over $400 billion of client money to invest in more sustainable strategies. This is out of more traditional strategies. And so let me talk about the two ways we have to look at climate risk. One is what I'm talking about, but I want to go back to another major component of climate risk. That's just the physical impact of climate risk. So we have now onboarded technology onto our Aladdin system, where we could overlay satellite imaging and then overlay that with a model of how climate can change and what would be the impact of a 1 degree or 2 degree difference, increase in temperatures, and how would that impact water levels? How will that impact heat? How does that impact crops and crop locations where they're going to be, where they can grow most successfully? And then we could overlay that and looking at what does that mean for that commercial real estate building? What does that mean for that mortgage-backed security or that municipal bond? What does that mean for a company that's in agriculture, that one of its big products is corn, and in this region with climate change, corn is not going to be as successful because corn can't tolerate high humidity and a lot of excess heat. And so we are at the midst now where we are able to show and quantify in different scenarios why we believe climate risk is an investment risk. The greater one will be how are we measuring each company as they move towards a more decarbonized footprint. We expect within the next 6 months that most regulators around the world are going to ask public companies to report under some facet of TCFD. I think we're moving closer to a global taxonomy so we can all judge companies accordingly. And so then we are going to have, through that data, having the ability to understand how one company in a single industry is performing in a decarbonized way versus one of its peers. And getting back to now this pool of money that we are being awarded by the asset owners, we then can make a judgment on each company, how they're moving in towards a more decarbonized footprint. And then we are seeing companies that are traditionally in be it the topic or the S&P index, we may not invest in those companies because they're not moving as fast as other companies in their industry. And we have now seen as an industry about $4 trillion of money moving into sustainable indexes and sustainable assets, of which BlackRock has about 10% of it now. We are now seeing that systematic movement away from traditional indexes or liabilities into more liabilities or indexes that can properly attribute different sustainability measurements for the assessment of companies. And through that, we will be able to show and quantify why climate risk is investment risk. 2/3 of the money we manage on behalf of all the people who've been awarding us their money is retirement assets. And so our assets are very long dated. And because they're so long, these assets are going to be impacted by the changes of the world's climate. And that's why we must take this proactive view in helping them. And I believe this is going to be critical. And for the CEOs who are listening in today, I would just urge you and your board of directors to be very focused on this, being focused on how your company is moving forward in this decarbonized world. As I said, you're going to see bigger and larger movements of money away from traditional liabilities into these new liabilities or indexes. And that's where we're going to see the changes. And we're already witnessing, Sue, that we're seeing some companies in the same industry are trading at much higher PEs than the other one. And it's more than just having a good product or more than just being in the right space. It's about their corporate purpose, how they're living it, and how they're moving forward in a decarbonized way.
That makes sense. Again, sticking with the ESG theme, but now moving to S, you've also talked a lot about stakeholder capitalism and the need for companies to address all of their stakeholders, including employees and the communities in which they operate. What opportunities does the S in ESG present for Japan?
Let me step back contextually for a second. Our view is companies that are very forward focused on stakeholder capitalism, companies that are very forward focused on becoming the best they can related to E, S, and G, are the companies that have the most durable profitability and are the companies that could sustain itself in this more polarized world that we're living in today. And it's more important than ever in this polarized world that companies are focused on all these issues as a purposeful company, or they're going to be harmed in one way or another, and they're not going to have durable profitability over the long run. And that is why we so firmly believe in companies that are very purposeful, companies that are focused on E, S, and G, are companies that are going to be performing in all markets, in all different economic scenarios. They're going to be performing better and relative to their peers in the industry. In Japan, Japan has been late in S. But I see great progress in the last 2-3 years. I'm actually heartwarmed about the changes. I have regularly conversation with CEOs, Japanese CEOs, and I know more and more companies are really focused on how to have more diversity within their board. One of the foundations of why we think a diverse management team and a diverse board is essential is we see too many times that companies have one opinion. There's just too much group think. Diversity can be a way of reducing group think. Alternative opinions, alternative ways of focusing and thinking. And so the key for Japan is to be focusing on how to become more diverse of mind. And I think through that diverse of mind, it creates more innovation, creates more creativity, and it creates higher probabilities of long-term success. And so it is critical in Japan, like in every other country in the world, that we bring forth a more aggressive agenda related to diversity, and in Japan specifically in gender, and moving more women up in the leadership ranks of companies, leadership ranks on the board levels, and making sure that we have that openness of conversations that leads to a difference of ideas that will lead to more global success and long-term success. And so we believe Japan is on that path. I am also pleased to see how the Japanese government is moving forward very aggressively now on climate risk and how Japan is going to be playing a role. And all the corporations are going to have to be moving forward with that too. This is a great opportunity. Japan is one of those countries that is so dependent on technology and technology innovation. Japan has some of the greatest companies in the world today. This is why I so much enjoy coming there and learning from the Japanese companies itself. And I will tell you, when Sue and I went to Japan in early years, we learned so much in Japan. And another little secret that very few people know, when BlackRock was founded, our first global client worldwide was a Japanese client. It was not a US client. So now Japan has a great opportunity to really advance itself too, to push forward in the journey of a more diverse board, more diversity at the management team level, but more importantly, to bring forth a more articulated strategy of ESG.
Yeah, I have to say that, in the more than 33 years, really, because it predates the company, that we've been going to Japan, we've seen a huge evolution, and there's more to go, but it's very promising and exciting to see.
Yes.
The last of ESG is G. As the chairman of a public company, someone who speaks with other boards frequently, how do you see board governance evolving? And what do you think boards are doing or should be doing to support management in delivering long-term profits and in engaging with both stakeholders and shareholders?
I think there's so much evidence today that when there is a good, diverse board, a board that plays a substantive role, not just a box checker, these companies perform so much better. There are so many examples of bad boards and bad results. Unfortunately, we still find them. We still are shocked at how bad boards are. I have always taken the view that the boards are essential. And I would say to all of you, when we went public 22 years ago, the management team of BlackRock wanted to have a board that can really push us, not pull us, push us, and move us forward. And I probably learned more in leadership from my board than any other place in the 22 years of being public. And we have current CEOs, ex-CEOs who know our industry. But most importantly about a board is making sure the board has, again, diversity of mind. Making sure that the board has different viewpoints. At BlackRock, we have a member on our board who's better at merchandising and marketing and branding than probably the sum of all of BlackRock. And he helps us push us along. We have members of our board who are CEOs of technology companies because more and more of BlackRock's revenues are technology-based. And so we are learning from them. We have board members who had great histories in financial services, who understood how a financial services company can grow internationally. And so we have board members who come from different places, different times. Most recently, we put a board member, we added a board member who runs the largest farming cooperative in America. And agriculture and how middle America is, with those polarizing world, we believe that is a great way of us to learn. And so it's essential for all management teams to have a board that can push an organization forward. What I'm proud about BlackRock's board and how we look at other boards is, are they using the pronoun we? Because it is we that are moving forward. What is our purpose and how are we living that purpose? And a board is essential. And importantly for me, I asked all our management team to make presentations to our board. I try to involve more and more of our management team than I know of other traditional boards do. And I would encourage you, having the boards get to know the whole leadership team. One of the other things we do that probably is not common in Japan, our board members actually have a key pass to come into every one of our offices worldwide. And they don't have to ask me, because this is our firm. They have the right to go in, sit and meet management teams in every office, walk around no different than any other employee does, To me, this is an involved board. So a board must feel like they're a part of the company and they understand the fiduciary responsibility of representing the owners of the company. They're not there to represent the management team. They're representing the owners of the capital that invested in the company, but having them as that go between the management team and their shareholders, but lifting the company on behalf of the shareholders.
I think it's you take for granted the relationship you have with the board, having sat on both sides of that table. I think it's rare and really valuable that the way in which you engage your board and see them as your thought partners and your colleagues makes it more fun to be on the board too.
Well, it makes it more fun for me also because I could not imagine a perfunctory board meeting. I could not imagine a board that is just bored to tears and they're not really learning and engaged. The most important thing we all need is an engaged board. And let me just say another thing. It's urgent that we all have a board of diversity to get that diversity of thought.
Okay, I'm going to cycle back to climate again as a cornerstone topic of this conference. As you know, Secretary Kerry and Minister Koizumi spoke to the U.S. Japan Council earlier this year about possible bilateral government initiatives on climate change. You just got back from the G20 and the COP26 meetings. What role do you think U.S. and Japanese companies can and should play to support the transition, and is there an opportunity to work together?
There's no question we are moving forward as a world. It's not going to be a straight line upward. Governments are asking public companies to do a lot of the heavy lifting, which will have some unintended consequences. Governments are not, in my mind, doing enough yet, and we need to have more multilateralism. And as you said, if we can truly bring the U.S. and Japan as leaders, true leaders, with results in moving the climate issues in front of us together to eliminate the risks of climate, we'll all be better off. We have to balance our short-term profitability with our long-term viability. We have to make sure that all society comes together, not just parts of society, or it's going to lead to polarization. So I would just say urgently, we as leaders of our companies have to work together, Japan and US companies together, but importantly, US governments alongside the Japanese government. We need to do this. We need to find solutions. We need to be rapidly deploying our science together, whether the science to rapidly create green hydrogen, maybe blue hydrogen in between. We need to rapidly focus on how to bring forth, green steel and green cement and green agriculture. We need to rapidly focus on how can we have more sustainable and permanent sustainable electricity as we move towards the elimination of a combustible engine to electric engine. So there's great opportunities to work together, and there's great risk if we don't. And so I would say we need to find solutions together. We need to be building a pathway in doing this. And if the developed countries like Japan and the United States can't do it, if our two countries just talk but not walk, how do we expect the emerging world to move forward? 34% of the hydrocarbon footprint in the world, minus China, is a developing world. They have far greater problems than the US has and Japan has. We have the wealth, we have the pool of capital to make it happen, but importantly, we need to be also focusing on how we move forward, but how does the emerging world move forward? If we don't find solutions for the emerging world, the world will never get to a net zero. And so I would just say it is urgent that we find solutions together. It is urgent that we rebuild multilateralism. It is urgent that we think that government and business can work together, not against. It is urgent that we find ways of making the transition fair and just, or we're going to create more polarization. And this is one of my fears. Can democracy do this fast enough? Can we do this in a way that we are doing this together for humanity? The reality is, if we cannot stop the pathway towards a 2-degree increase, we're going to have far bigger costs as a world. Whether the cost is going to be through migration that is beginning already, we are going to see segments of the world that is going to be inhospitable, where people can't live and can't grow agriculture. And so this is not something that is elective. This is something that is mandatory. And I understand, and we all have the short-term risk as running public companies. And we're going to have to blend the short-term pressures with these long-term needs. We're going to have to blend our ways of finding opportunities together. And the last thing I would say, we all need a voice.
So just to close on that point, I mean, obviously the challenges are great. But I know, you said this earlier, and I know, you are by nature an optimist. So what keeps you optimistic as a leader and as a global citizen? And what do you think the members of the U.S. Japan Council can do to have the greatest impact?
There's no question at any one given time being a pessimist can work. But over my 45 years, something like that, 45 years of being in finance, and when we had 18% inflation, we had oil shocks, and we had all these different crises, we as a species find solutions. And over the long run, it pays to be an optimist. Over the long run, most people have too much money in a bank account in cash. It is proven over the 45 years, those who've invested with optimism or invested for the long term in strong long-term assets are the biggest beneficiaries of wealth accumulation. When you think about how quickly we were able to create a vaccination in something that normally takes at least 4 years, we did it in months. We could do it. And so the key for Japan and the United States, both great democracies, great countries built on our own unique purposes, built on technology and technology innovation, we can solve these issues and we can move humanity forward. At COP26, financial institutions, include many Japanese institutions, pledged $130 trillion investing in in sustainable investments. If that happens, think about the transformation of humanity. Think about how we can create new, wonderful jobs. Think about how we can move forward as a world, as a species. Think about how we could have more biodiversity if we do this. Think about the fauna that will survive. But most importantly, think about the economic prosperity of the world moving forward.
Thanks, Larry. And if the macro issues aren't enough to compel you, then it's all personal at the end. So think about your children and your grandchildren and their children and the world we're leaving them.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for all of your insights and your comments. And I hope that the audience will take great inspiration from them.
Good to see you, Sue.
Great.
I'll see you in next board.
A couple weeks. Thank you.
That was truly inspiring. Thank you, Phyllis. Thank you, Larry and Sue, for your wisdom and leadership. Next, we are honored to hear from Toshiaki Higashihara, who leads Hitachi's global efforts to put sustainability at the forefront of its investments and operations. He joined this exclusive conversation with Paul Yonamine, USJC's Chair of the Board of Directors.
Thank you, Suzanne. Hello, Mr. Higashihara, and thank you very much for joining us today and for your and Hitachi's ongoing support of the U.S. Japan Council. As you know, I worked for Hitachi for 4 years in Tokyo 15 years ago. And I've always been impressed with your great organization. The company is clearly part of the fabric of Japan. So with that, I'd like to start with the broader Japanese business sector and its effectiveness in addressing critical environmental, social, and governance challenges. This is all part of ESG. As one of Japan's top corporate leaders, how would you say Japan and Hitachi are doing so far?
Well, to resolve the social challenges such as climate change and the COVID pandemic, it is critical that the multiple global companies cooperate to co-create solutions. Enterprises, customers, and partners should all mobilize their expertise to take counter actions together as a whole. Stakeholder capitalism, which counts for the interest of all stakeholders, is something that has been around in Japan for 100 years. Especially, Hitachi has providing social infrastructure such as power grid, railways, and water management, which are essential for people's lives. Hitachi had expertise in operational technology for more than 100 years. Hitachi combined the OT experience with our IT platform, Lumada, and provides solutions and values to social issues under one roof. Co-creation with customers is a key for Hitachi's social infrastructure business. Hitachi has launched the Lumada Alliance Program, which is a platform for ecosystem of co-development of technology and partnership beyond one company through Lumada. As this unique social innovation business provider, Hitachi keeps providing social values such as efficiency, sustainability, and resilience through partnership with all stakeholders.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Higashihara, how has Hitachi evolved as a purpose-driven company, especially as you have transitioned from a product-oriented company to a more global solutions-focused enterprise active in such a broad range of business areas as diverse as energy, transportation, robotics, and more?
Founding in 1910, Hitachi's corporate mission has been contribute to the society through the development of superior original technology and products. Hitachi has been operating its business through this mission since the beginning. Hitachi originally had been a purpose-driven company. Hitachi still valued its original mission statement and aimed to be a social innovation global leader. In all business sectors, Hitachi incorporates the idea of co-creation with customers to resolve social issues. I myself have led the structural reform and the growth strategy of Hitachi through transformation to the digital company. Hitachi's digital business platform, Lumada, combined with Hitachi's hard infrastructure, such as rail, power grids, and industry, will make it possible to resolve a broad range of the social issues. As an example, I would like to introduce the dynamic headway solution involving the Copenhagen Metro. Hitachi provides an optimal train traffic control system to customers by combining Hitachi's expertise in operational technology, IT, and products. Through digitalization, Hitachi provides intelligent social infrastructure and innovation. With these business operations, I aim to run the company with hopes that each employee will contribute to society by taking on social issues as their own.
I really understand the purpose-driven nature of that. Thank you. My next question is very relevant for our U.S. Japan Council members. What do you think are the opportunities for collaboration between the United States and Japan to address the pressing issues of our day, especially around climate crisis?
To tackle the climate change issues, our urgent need is to promote carbon neutral technology development. Particularly for Hitachi, digital platform Lumada is a key technology to tackle climate change and to improve efficiency in social infrastructure. To strengthen Lumada capability, Hitachi has acquired Global Logic, which was a leading US company in digital engineering service this past year. With technological collaboration between United States and Japan, I strongly believe there are opportunities and possibilities for innovation in the field of the green infrastructure, such as digital grid and green mobility. This past March, Hitachi was awarded a contract to supply 256 rail cars for Washington, D.C. Metro. These rail cars are much lighter than existing cars and more energy efficient. Along with this project, Hitachi plans to construct an assembly facility with creation of jobs in the surrounding area. In addition, we announced the delivery of our latest digitally controlled signaling system called CBTC for Bay Area Rapid Transit in San Francisco. Hitachi has also acquired ABB Power Grid Division last year and named it Hitachi Energy this past October. It has a strong expertise in high voltage digital current technology, which can contribute to more efficient energy transmission for renewable energy sources. Through our business expansion in social infrastructure, combined with our digital platform, Hitachi contribute to carbon neutral and quality of life improvement in the United States. Furthermore, as one of the principal partners of the COP26, which takes place this November, Hitachi will lead discussion on climate change with government and global business leaders.
Right, thank you, thank you. And finally, you're leading a truly global company during very challenging times. A global pandemic, a climate crisis, social justice movements. You know, what are some of the lessons you have learned as a leader during these unique times?
Yeah, COVID pandemic has a great challenge to human race, but at the same time, it also provides opportunities for society to transform. The strengths and the weakness of humans and business emerged. At the same time, it tested our resilience to endure the crisis and to overcome adversity. Humans are selfish in nature, but this challenge has urged us to contribute to the society, sacrifice beyond selfishness based on empathy to others. At this challenging time, courageous leadership is essential, especially managing a large organization. As Hitachi's top leader, I strongly suggested remote work for all employees during pandemic based on empathy to other lives. Going back to our mission statement has been extremely important, especially during the current ongoing crisis. I believe each employee should always be aware of how they can contribute to the society while still even working remotely away from the office.
Thank you so much, Mr. Higashihara. I really wish we had more time. There's so many other questions I would really like to ask you, but I can't thank you enough for spending some time with us today. I'm sure on behalf of all of the council members, we all appreciate your participation in our bilateral boardroom event. And once again, I also want to thank the great Hitachi organization for always supporting the U.S. Japan Council. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And what a privilege to have those insights from Mr. Higashihara. Next, we turn to USJC's community to understand what it takes to strengthen purpose-driven leadership in today's challenging environment. USJC Council Leader Lori Teranishi will moderate this closing dialogue. As a strategic communications leader, Lori understands the importance of connecting purpose to actions in ways that inspire others to take action. Lori, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lori Teranishi. I'm the CEO of IQ360, and I am so delighted to be here with all of you today. I am calling this panel the Role Model Panel, and I think we will have an absolutely fascinating conversation today. Now that you've heard from Larry Fink and Toshiaki Higashihara about ESG and purpose-driven leadership at a high level, we want to now talk about what you do when you're not the CEO of a major corporation. How can each of us find our own angle on ESG? If we all embrace the mindsets of our three panelists here today, I believe we will become the role models we desperately need to bring about change. As many of you know, a key focus of USJC is to develop leaders no matter what phase of our careers that we are all in. And ESG is a huge issue that all leaders in all industries need to grapple with. So not only is it an opportunity for you to impact what I believe and many people believe is one of the most existential threats in our lifetimes, but it's also an opportunity for you to develop your own skills, your own brand and your own leadership skills. Each of our three speakers has traveled very different paths in their lives and careers, yet they all share a passion to make this world a better place. So I hope what you hear today will help you reflect on your own ways that you can grow as a leader and what more you can accomplish with the ability to motivate others or even spark a movement. So today, let me introduce our three very inspirational leaders. The first is Robin Lewis. He's the co-founder of Social Innovation Japan and MyMizu. He's a social entrepreneur based in Japan who works with social enterprises, NGOs, and governments globally. And he was recently selected by MIT Technology Review as in its inaugural list of innovators under 35 in Japan. Welcome, Robin. Next, we have Kathy Matsui, Next, we have Kathy Matsui, General Partner for Empower Partners, Japan's first ESG-focused global venture capital fund. And she is a former vice chair and chief Japan strategist for Goldman Sachs, where she coined the term womenomics, which urged the Japanese government to encourage more participation by women in the workforce as a key component in combating economic stagnation. We're so excited to have you here today, Kathy. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Finally, Rika Nakazawa is also joining us. She's Group Vice President and Industry X Co-Innovation at NTT. She's also a best-selling author and co-founder and chairwoman of Strides AI, a social impact venture fund focusing on diversifying the boardroom and C-suite by empowering women and underrepresented groups to build social capital with modern technology. Welcome, Rika.
Thank you. Thank you, Lori.
So as you can see, we have a panel that I am so excited myself to learn from. And I wanted to start off today by asking each of you, and Robin, I'll ask you to start. Each of you is involved in tackling one or more issues under the ESG paradigm, environmental, social, and governance issues, through either your own personal or professional capacity. Would you be able to briefly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about what your company is focused on?
Thank you so much for the introduction. My name's Robin Takashi Lewis, and I'm half Japanese and half English. And my mother's family is originally from the northeastern part of Japan, around Miyagi Prefecture. And nothing really remarkable happened in my life until around university, where I was studying business. And during that time, I really felt slightly dissatisfied because all of the conversation was around profit maximization and not necessarily around how business can be a driver for good. And with that kind of dissatisfaction, I actually graduated just as the Great East Japan earthquake happened here in Japan. And I came back and spent many months in Fukushima and Iwate and Miyagi, volunteering, and that became a huge turning point in my life. So since then, I've been spending the past 10 years working in social and environmental issues, both by leading my own organization, which is called Social Innovation Japan, and also by tackling the issue of plastic waste and sustainability through my Mizu, which is my latest venture. So thanks again for having me, and I'm excited for the conversation.
Thank you, Robin. Kathy, can you share a little more about your journey?
Sure. Pleasure to be here with all of you. So, as some of you may know, I have spent 30 years in what we call sell-side research, working mainly at Goldman Sachs and analyzing Japan's stock market and corporate sector during that time. And during that period, which was entirely after the Japanese bubble burst period, so there was a lot of dislocation, deflation, many structural headwinds were facing the Japanese market as well as economy. And during that time, I did a lot of research on some of the biggest structural challenges facing Japan, including corporate governance practices, lack of diversity. And so when I was thinking about what to do with when I grow up, a few years ago, two friends of mine and I decided, well, why don't we take what we've worked on, and all of us have worked in the field of diversity and governance with corporations, with investors, but we also knew that Japan really desperately needs increased innovation, something that I know Robin is hands-on working on. And we wanted to kind of tie those two things together, i.e. bring the best practices of ESG, but rather than trying to convince large listed companies to change their ways, because it's always tougher to teach old dogs new tricks, rather, why don't we work with younger startup companies that are more nimble, that are more, frankly, progressively minded, and let's try to integrate ESG when they're, frankly, teenagers. Get the ESG into their DNA when they're younger. And to us, our whole hypothesis with our fund, which is called Empower Partners, is that ESG integration at that stage can actually drive sustainable and scalable growth. So that's what I'm working on now.
Oh, that's so interesting. I love that. Rika, can you share a little bit about your story?
Yeah, absolutely. So I came into ESG through D&I. I've been an Asian woman in technology my whole career. I'm a little bit ashamed to admit that it wasn't until quite later in my career that I would have liked, did I have that waking up moment when I was attending a women alumni conference for Princeton alumni women and attending a session about women on corporate boards. And it was 3 seasoned public company board members that were talking about the challenges they were having and getting into the challenges they had to overcome to get to the boardroom. And this is in late 2018. And so when I had this piano fall in my head that you see in the cartoons and you have this waking up moment, I thought, okay, there must be a way that we can do something about this lack of access to social capital, which are those relationships that you cultivate historically on golf courses and cigar rooms and poker rooms, etc. You get the idea. I thought, okay, I've been in technology my whole career. Airbnb and Uber have demonstrated the power of network orchestration to make two sides that are really fundamentally looking for each other but don't know how find each other. And so that launched my purpose around focusing on D&I. And it was around that same time that I started suffering really badly from the California fires. I have asthma. So even before COVID-19 happened, I had masks in my house so that I could just breathe and not have an asthma attack. And I think it was, again, that personal, profound, visceral experience that catapulted me into feeling like there has to be something that I can do, even as an individual, whatever it is that I can do to make an impact and to really raise the volume on considerations around ESG was something that I started to focus on. And of course, this was on the heels of having been part of a conscious capitalism conferences in the past, and also the B Corporation, which was something that I entertained when I was launching my social impact venture to get more women and diversity on boards. And interestingly enough, of course, during the past 2 years, COVID-19 has been an absolute crucible to really illuminate some of these aspects that in the dimensions of ESG that have come to life. And so I'm very excited to be part of not just this panel, but really the agenda that the U.S. Japan Council and Suzanne is driving with the board and the leadership at the USJC.
Well, that's wonderful. And it's amazing to hear sort of your different pathways, but each of you clearly is an agent of change. So it's really, really a great thing, what we're going to hear today. Some people in our audience work in process-driven cultures or in environments, in the familiar term where the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. So in addition, some of these people were raised to speak softly, right? Let their work speak for them, and to seek consensus rather than to come off appearing bossy or, pushing their own agendas too forcefully. This can be appropriate in some situations, but it can also slow things down. So how do you feel if you're coming from a place of wanting to drive purpose-driven leadership, how do you do it, in these contexts? Rika, do you want to start?
Sure. The way that I find how you get the momentum going is you think about all the stakeholders, right? This movement around, or this amplification rather, of ESG has really been on the heels of, for example, the Business Roundtable restating the purpose of a business. And I'm going to paraphrase slightly here, but it's not about shareholder profit solely. It's really around stakeholder capitalism. And so the way that I, in another organization, really started to activate some inertia and get past the inertia around this, because people were very focused on short-term, quarter-on-quarter performance and things like that, versus this, ESG. Sometimes it's bifurcated in that way. Is really to say, okay, our clients and our employees and our partners from a supply chain perspective, they're focusing on sustainability. They're focusing on D&I. They're asking the questions. They're putting it into RFPs. And so once you start to gather that evidence and you can demonstrate that this focus on sustainability, on D&I and governance and transparency isn't something that happens outside of the box. It happens very much within the box, and then it breaks through all four walls and is something that is integrated as part of a larger whole of how an enterprise exists, because an enterprise doesn't exist in a silo. It's all part of a mesh and a web and a fabric. And so really, I recognize the possibilities less so from how do you get people feeling like they have to stand out like a nail. It's not that at all. In most cases, it's really about being able to find the signals, the signal to noise ratio, and then being able to bring the signals together in a way that creates a song, so to speak, that people can understand and be starting to be able to tap their heads and nod their heads and tap their feet too, to take that metaphor a little bit too far maybe, but hopefully that works.
Well, it ties into the piano falling on your head. I see a music theme emerging here, Rika. But Kathy, what do you think about what Rika said? How do you try? I know that you work with younger companies because you can, seed ESG into the DNA of a younger company. But if you're already in an established company or in a company where it is more consensus driven, do you have any thoughts on how you might exert purpose driven leadership?
So during the course of my prior life career, where I not only conducted research into governance and diversity related matters, for example, let's take womenomics, it frankly was very difficult to convince everybody that this was not just a nice to have, but an imperative for growth. And I think that one of the strategies, if you're in an organization and you want to affect some kind of change along these ESG lines, my best recommendation is to use objective and empirical analysis to prove that by doing these things, whether it's better governance, greater diversity, being conscious and measuring your carbon footprint, whatever it is, that this can actually lead to growth. And I think in the past, at least in my world of capital markets and investment, historically, I think ESG or sustainable investing was synonymous with a performance trade-off, right? So if I do these good things, I'm giving up returns or performance. Today, however, particularly post-COVID, it has completely flipped, meaning that by integrating these principles of ESG into your corporate core strategy, you can actually outperform your peers. And this, I think, evidence is becoming more voluminous by the day. And so to convince the skeptics, this to me is really going to be key. And I think here in Japan, remember gender diversity womenomics 20 years ago when I started writing about this topic, wasn't getting any traction because people didn't understand that this was a key to economic and business growth. Now, however, that conversation has shifted, and I think more and more people do get it, they understand. So now the next step is really, so how do I implement that? If I believe it, so how do I get more women, more diverse people into positions of leadership and all of that? So I think it starts with engaging, particularly the skeptics, into this sort of movement with empirical analysis and data. I think that's probably the most effective way I have come across to convince those people.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. Thank you, Kathy. And I, myself, we do a fair amount of work in ESG, and I encounter a number of executives who are still quite skeptical about whether or not whether ESG is here to stay. And maybe I'll ask Robin this: how do you push forward with an ESG agenda and purpose-driven leadership in the face of resistance, or with those who advocate taking a wait-and-see approach?
So to build upon the previous comments, I think one of my favorite sayings in Japanese is "pinchi o chance ni." When you see a problem, you can see it either as a negative thing or as a massive opportunity. And I think with ESG, we're seeing such a huge opportunity for financial performance, for growth, for social value. And so I think it's actually an incredibly exciting time for companies to not see it as a must or a mandatory checklist. It's actually a really big opportunity to get out there in front of the pack, as it were. I also think that when we're talking about organizational change, it often helps to think of heads, hearts, and hands, right? When we talk about heads, we have to get intellectual buy-in. We have to provide the logical reasoning of why we should do something. The heart is more the emotional buy-in. How do you hook people into the conversation, get them involved, and get them to co-create something within an organization? And then finally, the hands is how do you get people to take daily actions that lead you to where you need to be? And so I kind of like that framework because it appeals to all of the different senses, and it helps organizations change in that sense. And just one thing to add there is also, I think ESG decisions are fundamentally business decisions, because if a company continues to, let's say, waste, pollute the oceans and pollute the rivers and so on, or treat their community badly with unfair labor practices or what have you, ultimately the government should crack down and introduce new legislation, and that will lead to all kinds of costs and complications for a company. So I think ESG decisions are very much business decisions that need to be made really at the most high and the most core level.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it aligns with what Kathy said before, that it used to be a trade-off decision, but more and more companies are realizing you can actually outperform if you do embrace some of this. And even more than just, regulatory consequences, your customers themselves can walk away, right? They have the power of their pocketbooks as well. But tell me really quickly, I just want to ask you one more question, Robin, about what you said about hearts. Because, a lot of us in business, we don't always think with our hearts or, feelings. I mean, data is good, right? You said in business school, it was all about profit maximization. So when you talk about hearts, just give me an example of how you would lead with heart.
In terms of the heart, one thing that my personal approach, and as an organization, what we really try and do is do storytelling. Why is something important? Why should we have ownership, not just at the top level, but also among more junior or newer employees, among middle management? And so it's about storytelling of why this company has such an important role to play. And what I really like to do is bring in, for example, inspiring speakers, inspiring games, fun activities, to really get that why, the core reason of that organization's existence to the members of the organization. And we've actually taken, for example, senior level executives to temples and forests and done all kinds of retreats to really get that why into the conversation. So it's not just forcing or pushing messaging onto people, it's really understanding where they're coming from and encouraging ownership over an ESG related issue.
And do you think that by doing that and connecting with their hearts, then you get the hands where they actually become themselves engaged in a more direct way?
I think it provides the motivation to have more hands, the activities. But then I think we also need to equip people with the tools and the knowledge and the systems to then create change internally as well. So I think the heads, the hearts, the hands, they have to be kind of working together and relatively well integrated to make sure that we can get to that goal or the vision.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Lori, I was just going to mention there's this excellent book called The Heart of Business, written by Hubert Joly, who was the CEO of Best Buy, helped turn Best Buy around, and this is what he talks about. And the opening of the book, there's a piece there by Bill George, who's a senior fellow at Harvard Business School, and he writes that in 1995, my wife Penny and I met with Buddhist monk who taught us the longest journey you'll ever take is 18 inches from your head to your heart. And so I kind of feel like we might be at like inch 17, in terms of where we are in the corporate landscape right now. But, just listening to Robin speak and your question about the heart reminded me of that excellent book and that fantastic quote that's right at the beginning.
That's wonderful, Rika. Thank you for bringing that up. And I want to read that book now. But it also, your comment reminds me of what Kathy said when she first began speaking about womenomics. I mean, you didn't say it quite like this, Kathy, but it sounded like maybe sometimes you felt like you were shouting in the wind. And, was anyone listening? And, fast forward 10, 20 years, I mean, a lot of people have listened to you, are embracing this, understanding that it's actually a business imperative to integrate women into all facets of society. So part of it, it sounds like, could also be a progression. We have to storytell, we have to engage people, we have to show examples of how this actually works and why it's good for all sectors of the economy and society. It does seem to me when I hear each of you speak that it is really important to engage people, to build coalitions, to advance purpose-driven leadership or movements into ESG and purpose-driven activity. Kathy, can you speak a little bit to that and your perspectives on it?
So in terms of, any of these agendas or whatever you want to call it under the umbrella of ESG, similar to what I described earlier about womenomics, right? Somebody, actually one of my clients I remember, told me back in the 90s, Kathy, getting Japan to become more diverse is like trying to convince vegetarians to become carnivores. It's never going to happen, right? And I think that probably applies to many things in a country like Japan, steeped in history, very embedded custom stereotypes, mores, etc. However, it is a country that historically has been known to be dynamic and can change. And I think that to affect such change, not just here, but in any society, you do need to bring on what I call champions, or people who are going to be advocates alongside you. And so I think it was frankly not just, one person's research that changed the mindset. It was really about this chorus of support of advocates. So in the D&I context here, it was critically important that we had very senior male CEOs, political leaders step up and say, this is a business and economic imperative for growth. Do you want to grow or not? This is a binary question. And so I think too, even at the organizational level, if you're in a company or an organization where you're trying to affect any kind of change, it's really hard to do it alone. But if you've got a team and like-minded people, then I think it's far, far easier. And what I have found very recently is that when it comes to ESG principles or purpose-driven leadership, I have been so struck and very impressed by the younger generation, whether you call it millennials, Gen Z, Gen Xers, because it's built into their DNA. They get it. They don't have to be convinced, but they now want to understand, so what is my purpose? What is the purpose of the organization I'm working at? What kind of impact is this organization having on society? So I think if you're on the employer side and you're trying to recruit the best talent you could possibly recruit, and you don't have that mindset embedded within your organization to welcome and embrace that perspective, then it's going to be very hard for you to recruit the best talent, right? Simple as that. So I think this is really all coming around in a very positive way. So it's not just a minority of views and cheerleaders advocating for change, but we've got this whole younger generation that to me is very impressive, moving very, very quickly. And that's what keeps me, super optimistic.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Kathy. I agree. And Robin, since you're one of these younger generation leaders in bringing about change, maybe I could ask you to build upon that. So can you just tell us a little bit more what inspired you to build Social Innovation Japan and MyMizu? And I'm trying to give our readers a flavor for how you approached it, what you thought about, and how you grew it into a successful change movement.
I think for me, at the core is really just asking why. That whenever I personally or my team see problems, we just keep asking, why does this happen? Why? And there's the famous technique, the 5 whys, right? And that often gets you to quite an interesting level of insight. And what we found was when we started Social Innovation Japan back in 2017, we saw that there were pockets of social and environmental action. We wanted to kind of bring everyone together and create a space where people were able to communicate, able to collaborate. And that's what we really begun with. It's just simple community building, doing events, training programs, workshops, and so on. And then that kind of just grew naturally into something much bigger, where we were doing consulting projects, we're making physical products and services. And it's just been a really, really fun and really wonderful experience. And with MyMizu, what was the driving factor for us was that we saw a need for real systems level change when it comes to sustainability. We're facing really unprecedented and quite incredibly significant challenges when it comes to sustainability. And we need to have massive behavioral change in order to meet that challenge. And so we found that if we can combine technology and combine community, which is really at the heart of what we do, then we can hopefully try and engage the masses in a meaningful way towards a more sustainable future. So it was really that belief that we need big, bold, and systems level change. Even though we started very small, I think we're slowly getting closer towards that.
And quickly tell us, just for our viewers, what do you mean by leveraging technology? How did you leverage technology to create growth, and expand the movement?
So MyMizu is a crowdsourced and co-created platform. So the idea is we have people adding data every day around the world to our platform of water points. And so the idea is instead of buying bottled water, you can carry your own reusable water bottle and refill for free at any of our 200,000 locations around the world. So the theory of change there is if we can create a new ecosystem where people can refill their water bottle for free with tasty and safe water, then we no longer need plastic bottles. And so at the very core of our concept is co-creation, crowdsourcing. And in that sense, it's not just a tech service that we provide, it's a movement that we build together. And hopefully we're gaining good traction in Japan, and also we now have users in around 50 countries. So we're slowly taking over the world with free water is the idea.
Wow, that's wonderful. Yeah, and thank you for explaining that to us, because I do think technology and some of the concepts you talked about before in terms of engaging people, it just provides so much opportunity if leveraged in the right way. I want to talk to Rika a bit, because Rika, your background is in DEI primarily, but I know in other areas as well. And we were speaking just a few minutes before we all got on to this webinar, and you mentioned that you thought COVID-19 has really opened more doors and more opportunity. Could you speak about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's not, well, it's less that COVID-19 opened more doors. It just really amplified and illuminated, I think, the challenges and the opportunities. And I think with Kathy's incredible work with the fund that she started is leveraging the fact that there's evidence that companies that had some form of ESG discipline or framework outperform those that didn't, because ESG, to your point, is having the ESG framework. What you're saying, Robin, earlier is good business, right? It helps you anticipate risk. There's greater transparency in the system. You have greater affinity with your workforce, and they're less likely to leave in this great resignation period, et cetera. And so I think COVID-19 just really did that. But also, I want to talk about the word community, right? The idea that this pandemic has leveled any notion of levels, or leveled any notion of hierarchy or net worth. The pandemic didn't care who you were, where you came from. It just impacted everybody equally, so to speak. And so I think what it did was it really created this greater sense of we are part of a much larger whole, something that's greater than ourselves. And so as we move forward and come out of COVID-19, hopefully, the idea is that we have the opportunity to really come together around purpose and really think about the total ecosystem, all the stakeholders and everybody that's impacted upstream, downstream, all around the various pillars and dimensions of ESG. And in particular, having joined NTT, we're a technology company and we're a connectivity company, and that's not our tagline, obviously, but I think NTT really focuses on enabling the connected future. And to do that, I've been in plenty of conversations with leaders and CIOs that talk about top of mind agenda around the role that sustainability and ESG components have as it relates to the strategic roadmap moving forward. Right, so it's a boardroom level agenda. It's a 10K disclosure. It's really become embedded. And you look at sort of the pre-COVID and then the post-COVID. I think it's pretty well. I still need to do some investigation on this for something that I'm working on. But my hypothesis is that there's a clear sort of line between pre-COVID and post-COVID that demonstrates how much more focus and how much more disclosures and how much more relevance and imperative, as Kathy said, that there is to really being able to have a discipline, not just have a discipline and say the things, but really action on it and be able to action on it in a way that you can measure it. And that's also where innovation and technology comes to play, is the ability to measure and report those outcomes so that people can see that you're being authentic and credible around it.
Oh, that's a great points that you're making, Rika. One thing that I thought about as all of you are speaking, all three of you have one foot in the U.S., one foot in Japan, and also actually around the world. But we are the U.S. Japan Council, so do you see differences in the way leaders are approaching purpose-driven leadership in the U.S. and Japan, or you can comment globally too from what you've been seeing? Maybe I'll start with Kathy.
I'll chime in. So, having lived here for over 30 years and growing up in the States, although one can argue that Japanese style of leadership is not, for example, in a corporate governance context, doesn't necessarily hold to the highest global standards of governance. On the other hand, one could argue that let's just call it, Anglo-Saxon standard of governance is also not the correct path, right? That, as was mentioned earlier, very focused on short-termism, quarterly earnings, compensation differentials, huge, right, in the United States between the CEO and lower ranks. And so what's interesting is sitting here in Japan and the conversation that has occurred really in the last, I would say, 5 or so years, is that this Japanese concept of sampo yoshi, meaning more, I don't know if call it stakeholder capitalism, but concern not just for shareholders, but for your employees, for your customers and your community, has really risen to the fore. And I had conversations with people outside Japan about this whole, if you want to call it stakeholder capitalism or purpose-driven leadership, whatever, but they're looking at Japan's model of sampo yoshi and saying, hey, Japan invented this centuries ago. Maybe that's the model, that we should actually be pursuing. Now, again, I'm not trying to claim that the Japanese model of governance is the right model. I'm just saying that I think between these two rather large extremes of whatever you want to call it, capitalism, there is probably some kind of golden mean in here where we can take the best bits of each and hopefully integrate them to create a model of an economy, of a society that does exhibit much more inclusiveness than we've really practiced to date. And it's interesting because the new prime minister, you saw the election results here, that the new prime minister is actually talking about how to push forward this new, more inclusive mode of capitalism. It's certainly not easy, and I think this debate and discussion is going on in many, many countries around the world. But at least from my vantage point, I think Japan, maybe we can appreciate some of that positive aspects of sampo yoshi capitalism and practice a little bit differently going forward.
What you say resonates with me, Kathy, because I'm in Honolulu, Hawaii, and I recently wrote an article about how these new concepts of ESG are in many ways concepts that Hawaii has embraced for many years. So if you're a leader in Hawaii, for many decades, the leaders here have believed in responsibility for their employees, responsibility for community, and are actively involved in the community. So, we can look to small markets and big markets for lessons that we can all take in and take the best of everything and, advance the world, hopefully. But we're almost out of time. I wanted to ask each of you just to speak for 1 minute or less. Any parting thoughts? I started this conversation by saying that this is the role model panel, and I have learned so much from each of you, but if you were to impart some advice to any of the viewers listening or watching, what would you say to them in terms of how they can get involved or how they can make a difference in their own lives?
So from my perspective, I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for setting this up and everything. And I'd say while leadership is critical, I also think followership when it comes to social change is critical too. So sometimes we don't always have to be the person at the front kind of pulling the people or the cart and kind of with the vision. We can also be supporting those who are making those changes within organizations. That's one thought. And secondly is also, I'm often, I talk about social entrepreneurship and social innovation and these kinds of things, but I think that social entrepreneurship being when we come up with new concepts, new ideas, new initiatives within organizations also is critical. So we don't necessarily have to start new things. We can start new initiatives within existing structures and really drive positive change there. And finally, one parting thought for me is social change. What I've realized recently is that while I was very impatient and so on when I was younger, I realized social change is also not a sprint, it's a marathon. So we have to be patient, be perseverant, but also have this renewed sense of urgency, because the issues that we do face today are so critical and so time sensitive. So let's be patient, but let's also have that long-term view and have that sense of urgency as we take action every day. And on one final note, sorry, I have too much to say, but I love the idea of thinking big, but also starting really small. It doesn't matter how small the action may seem, that can have a huge knock-on effect. So let's think really big, but let's start with small steps and then hopefully get to that much bigger vision as we move forward.
So it's what Rika said about the 18 inches, right? And we're on inch 17 still, but we have to start incrementally. Kathy, what about you? What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I think that, USJC and this platform, which is really based on people-to-people relationships, is a fantastic way for everybody here to start building one's network, and from that to launch ideas and try to, as Robin said, start small. Small successes are very, very important to begin. A movement sounds like a big deal, but it's not a big deal. What kind of ideas do you have? What kind of innovations do you think this world needs? What kind of challenges? What are pain points in my VC speak world that we use often? What are pain points that you think you'd like to solve? And I think many conversations I've had around ESG sound extremely academic or lofty. At the same time, to me, it really comes down to the base root of good business and being a good corporate citizen, or being a good person in society, a good friend. These are not rocket science concepts by any means. These are quite basic, and so I think if we go back to basics and figure out how can we do things a little bit differently, I think that will be a very good guide for us to move forward. And lastly, my kids are in their 20s, and even though neither studied finance or economics, one of my children used to purchase things from a particular brand forever, as did all of her friends, until one day the CEO of that company tweeted something that was, sort of racially discriminatory on Twitter. And from that day forward, she and her friends stopped buying products from this company. And so I think it's very, very important for all of us to be aware, again, of this younger generation's mindset and consciousness level. Very, very sensitive to what people say, importantly, what they do. And I think that can also act as a really strong guide and help us move forward. And I'm so excited every day because I get to wake up, get out of bed, and meet amazing young entrepreneurs and learn something every day. So having your ear to the ground, cutting across generations, and just being curious and learning, that to me is my best advice.
Wonderful advice, Kathy. Rika, you're going to close it out for us. What are your thoughts quickly?
I have the pleasure of being able to say what Robin said and what Kathy said times 1,000. And I would add to that, if there's room, to say that purpose starts from within. And if you define what your purpose is today, there's nobody that's saying that that's what it has to be in a week or a month or 10 years. Just have a purpose that's authentic, what it is that excites you. Because I agree with Robin when he said earlier, the story, the narrative. What is the story that you want to be able to tell in a year from now, 5 years from now, on a future USJC panel, on Bilateral Boardroom? What is the story you want to tell? Because anything that's ever been anything in this earth and on this world started with an idea and an expression of that idea in a form of a story that inspires. And it has to be authentic, and it's got to come from a place of purpose.
Well, that's wonderfully said, Rika. And, as I listen to all of you, my mother raised my sister and me always. Her mantra was to have courage and compassion. She wanted to raise children that had courage and compassion. And it strikes me as I listen to all of you, we all have to have the courage to do what Robin said, keep our foot on the accelerator, but also realize that we have a long way to go, right? We have the courage to do that. But also we have to appeal to the heart. There's storytelling, there's connection to people to make all of this happen. And all of you, to me, demonstrate so much courage, so much compassion. I have enjoyed this panel so much, have learned a lot, and I will hold you to continuing this conversation at hopefully a future USJC conference, because I still have so much to learn from the three of you. So thank you so much for your time and your amazingly inspirational insights today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lori, Robin, Kathy, and Rika, for that blend of inspiration and education. I hope that all of you joining us will reflect on the conversations today and challenge yourselves to enhance the purpose you bring into your lives and your work. There is so much more we can learn from each other in Japan and in the United States. USJC will continue to offer platforms to bring together diverse individuals, organizations, and sectors so that we can each and together make a difference on issues that matter for the bilateral relationship, especially the climate crisis and the issues addressed through ESG advancements. We hope you will continue to engage with USJC and support our efforts. Our final event in the 2021 Signature Series is coming up in mid-December and will be our annual Next Generation Summit. This program is for and by our young leaders, especially from the Emerging Leaders, Tomodachi, and Watanabe Scholar alumni. But I assure you that leaders of all generations will learn from these young people, for whom the stakes are greatest of all. Looking ahead to 2022, we hope to return next fall to an in-person annual conference in Tokyo. Once again, we'd like to recognize all our sponsors who made today's program possible. Thank you for joining our second 2021 Bilateral Boardroom.